Hello, welcome to Calls with Your Kinky Bestie. I'm Emma. I am a submissive and mentor for fellow Kinksters. This podcast is all about insights into kinky life and dating, sharing my personal experience and stories, and help share mindset shifts too to get you into a confident space, more confident than you are now. So get ready. It all starts now.
Hey bestie, let's talk about swinging and swing clubs because my dom and I are actually about to renew our membership at our local swing club. So I figured now's as good a time as any to talk about it because it's definitely like a different kind of community and a different kind of space. But I think I recommend swing clubs to Kinksters in the community, especially like newer Kinksters or Kinksters with certain interests, like maybe people who are more interested in exhibitionism or voyeuring, or just like not as much into sadism and like kind of intimidated by some of the BDSM culture pieces. Like, I think it can be a good idea and a good option for some Kinksters, but it's definitely a different thing. So let's just get it all out in the open. In one episode, we'll talk about the differences in these communities, in these types of clubs and spaces, what to expect, so you can decide whether or not this is right or wrong for you, or maybe you'll like both types of spaces for different things, or maybe neither types of spaces. There's something for everybody. But let's talk about it. Because I hear some shit about the swing community, and I don't think it's all like justified. I really don't. Okay. And so what else I'm going to do is talk about my own positive experience at our local swing club, or positive experiences at our local swing club. Talk about how to actually find these spaces too, and some like red flag things to look out for too, to like more quickly determine whether or not a space is going to be right for you. So let's fucking do it. The biggest difference that I've noticed between swing clubs and kink spaces is that the swing community is definitely more focused on sex than anything else. Whereas BDSM spaces, like sometimes BDSM spaces don't even allow sex. And it's definitely going to be more set up for like BDSM activities and like scening and, role play and power exchange and that kind of stuff. And like sex isn't always the focus, whereas like swinging, sex is always going to be a big focus in those spaces because that's like what it's about. Some other big differences I've noticed is the swing spaces tend to be more like, there are some ground rules that everyone needs to follow. Of course, that's going to be like really important to having a business, because these are usually like businesses that own these clubs and have people come in. It's going to be really important for the longevity of those businesses and communities to have consent be centered, because obviously if like assault is happening, those spaces are going to be shut down or like canceled by the community and stuff. So consent is still a focus in a similar way that it is in BDSM communities. Sometimes we have like different standards for it. But it's still a thing. But with swing clubs, there tend to be lesser restrictions outside of that. So the big example I can think of is like substances. So swing clubs tend to have alcohol consumption. Like it's kind of a part of the community. Like, of course, you don't have to drink, but it's a thing that people are usually going to be doing. I haven't observed like super heavy drinking. It tends to be more like social, like, at a party kind of thing. But whereas a lot of BDSM spaces, there are usually really strict restrictions that like you can't be on any substances at all. And I'm not saying that one's better or worse than the other, but it's just different depending on the type of experience that you want. Like I totally commend and understand like having no substances in a space, especially where like kind of extreme activities are happening and stuff. But that's just kind of the difference between the two, is that swing clubs, it's more about like putting it on the individual to kind of create their their own experience and rules. It's kind of like everyone fends for themselves and like creates the experience that they want. Whereas in BDSM spaces, there tend to be like really strict rules. Maybe not strict, but there tends to be like an expectation of everybody's on like the same field with certain things, you know? Whereas with swing, you know, it's more about like you making your own decisions and what you want to have happen. Some other big differences is that, of course, BDSM spaces are going to be full of kinksters who are super aware of what BDSM is. And in swing spaces, that is not always the case. A lot of people in the swing community are like vanilla or don't really understand BDSM. There might be people in the swing community that don't like it. But generally I've just noticed it's a lot of like not understanding what it is, just being like totally oblivious to it. But there are, of course, people in the swing space that are kinky too. That's actually how I was introduced to the swing community, is through a kinkster. I'm going to tell you more about my personal experience too with that. But it's not an expectation that everyone who is at a swing club knows shit about BDSM, whereas you can expect that in a BDSM space, even though people have different like understandings of what that means and stuff. So some other subtle things with swing clubs being more sex focused, the spaces also look a lot different. So the spaces are definitely set up for sex to happen. It's more about like beds, and they'll have like, you know, sometimes towels out and certain rules around like, well, if you're going to use this piece of furniture, here's a towel for you to put down, and here's like a system for how you get these towels cleaned or like indicate that this bed has been used. And there's usually like even like house cleaners on staff who like go around like making sure that bed sheets are changed and stuff like that. Whereas like in BDSM spaces, again, like sex might not even be happening, so you might not even be allowed to have sex. And sometimes if you are, it's like there's only a very limited situations where that can happen. And sometimes the beds are like a hot commodity. Like there might not always be enough beds for everyone that wants to have sex. And then if it's even allowed. But BDSM spaces are going to have much more like equipment for BDSM. Like you'll see a lot more gear out, and it's also can be more like demonstration focused too. Like you can observe a lot of people in like a stricter protocol, and people like demonstrating using different gear and doing different things, or like showing off what their sub does for them and things like that. I think it's more, I've noticed that BDSM spaces tend to be a bit more like buttoned up and protocol-y, whereas like swing spaces tend to just feel like a party where it's like, everyone's kind of doing their own thing, fend for yourself. And I haven't noticed a lot of like judgment. It's kind of just like do your own thing. Whereas sometimes with BDSM spaces, I have noticed like we can be a little bit judgmental of others, or like, more quick to, be protective of each other and stuff. And like sometimes we can like make assumptions for what other people want and don't want. Whereas with a swing club, it's definitely on you as the individual to be aware of what you want and don't want. So that's a thing. Because there's not always like at my local swing club, they have someone on staff that you can like flag issues to. But in a BDSM space, sometimes there's like a dungeon. Oh my God, what are they called? Sometimes there's like a dungeon master or like dungeon masters working who are like there to observe what's going on and make sure that it is like following their rules. It's just slightly different. Okay. Was there anything else I wanted to say with that? I think that mostly covers it. Create the experience you want. So let me tell you a little bit about my positive experience with like our local swing club and what we do there, and how I found it through the kink community and how I prefer it over BDSM spaces. So we'll take a quick break and I'll come back and tell you all about that and how to find these spaces too near you.
Just a little break to share that if you are loving this podcast and my content, if I'm someone you could see yourself working with, but you're wanting more direct support for your specific situation, I do offer mentorship. It's personalized to you, private video or phone calls with me, so you can chat about your situation and figure out a solution that's going to work for you. You can visit my website. It is kinkybestie.com/mentorships to see what's available and to book in your spot on my calendar. It's Kinky with a Y at the end and Bestie with an IE at the end. The link will be in the show notes, so you can check it out there. Back to the show.
All right, we're back. We're talking about swing clubs versus kink clubs. And now I'm going to tell you why I, as a Kinkster, go to swing clubs and my positive experiences at my local swing club. And then we'll also cover how to actually find these spaces for yourself and some red flags to look out for too, to determine whether or not either of these spaces are going to be right for you. So I actually found the swing community in my local swing club through a Kinkster. I had this Dommy play partner at the time, and he would frequent this local swing club, even more than local dungeons, I think, and always spoke really highly of it and invited me to go. And the reason I first started going is because, first of all, I wanted to be able to have sex with my partner, around other people, and maybe get other people involved. And the BDSM communities near me do not always allow that, or are not always centered on that. So I knew I wanted to be able to have that experience. And I also knew that I was going with my partner who at the time was newer to BDSM and wasn't used to being around it. So he was intimidated by the BDSM scene, not quite ready to explore that and stuff, which I totally get. It can definitely be intimidating. And this just felt more casual and more casual and a little bit more fun. So that's kind of why we decided to start going. And then I'll share the experience of my local swing club and their rules and stuff. Of course, every place is going to be different, so your local swing club might not be like this, but here's the experience that I had. They had really a clear... So whenever you go the first time, everyone gets a house tour where they show you the lay of the land, the different rules in the different spaces, kind of their house rules, this is the consent system that we use. This is what we expect everyone follow. And then they also had rules for different areas of the club too. So they had areas that were everyone's clothed and this is just social. This is where everyone can go and get snacks. Past this area, full nudity is allowed. In this area, sex is allowed. And then they even had, so they had a open room where sex was allowed, where it was definitely larger and more beds and more set up for group sex. And then they had another area of the club that was individual rooms for sex too. And in those individual rooms, you could decide the amount of privacy that you wanted. So you could either close the door or close the curtain, which meant that no one is to interrupt you. It's just you, whoever you take behind that door. You could leave the door ajar, meaning that people can come in and observe or come in and talk to you and ask to participate. You could put a rope over the door, and that meant that people could watch but not come in or interact with you. Or you could just have the door open, where people could just come in or stuff. I don't remember if that's exactly how it was. We haven't been in a minute. We need to renew our membership to come back and stuff. But that's kind of what it was. And it was definitely more sex focused. And so the first time we went on a weeknight. So it was a smaller crowd. And it was also a crowd of more regulars is what we noticed. And so there was kind of only so many people to fill like this quite large space. So most people hung out in the like main play area. So that's where most of the socializing was happening, which was really fun because that was the room where like sex was allowed too. So like they had couches where like people were just hanging out and talking, but then like, a few feet away from you, there's a couple having sex, which we thought was like really fun to be around and like helped us like warm up and get comfortable, which is what we liked about it. But if that sounds like a nightmare for you, now you know maybe that's not the thing for you, So yeah, most people were socializing in that same space, and we definitely felt like the consent rules were like understood and followed by everyone. We didn't feel any weirdness. Like it didn't feel like there was pressure to do anything. Like our first time we went, we didn't even like have sex with anyone else or interact much with other people. One person did ask if they could, so we did end up like me and my partner having sex in like the public, quote unquote public play space where people were around and watching. And one person who I talked to early in the night like did like by name ask like, hey, is it okay if I like touch your leg? And they like made it like very explicit. It wasn't just like, is it okay if I touch you? It was like, is it okay if I touch you right here, right now? So it was really clear, really respectful and stuff. And so in that way, it felt like really what I was used to in the BDSM spaces, and the type of like clarity that I like. And we seriously didn't feel any pressure to do anything. Like I felt like we could have like not had sex or done anything that night and left and everything would have been okay, which I think is sometimes some people's fear is that it's expected. It's really, really not. You can just be there to hang out if you want. Because, they have spaces where voyeurism is not allowed. So someone does not okay with voyeurism, they can go and do that. And that's another subtle like BDSM community difference I've noticed is that some BDSM clubs are like anti-voyeurism, like where it's like explicitly prohibited to like just stare at anybody without participating or something like that. Which like, okay, if that's what you want, but like that is some people's kink. And some people also, it is their kink to be like watched and observed and stuff too. So it just seems a little silly to like ban that for everybody. Whereas that's like not really a thing in the swing spaces. Like you can go get privacy if you want it, but otherwise like this is kind of like an exhibitionism-y, voyeur-y space. And like we knew that's what was going on because we were in like the open public play space where we were just watching people have sex too. Another difference, I didn't cover this before, is that swing spaces, there's usually gendered pricing, which was really different and like it kind of like rattled my brain a little bit. And at first I was like really resistant to it. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is so like dated and stuff. But what I mean by that is like they have different pricing for people coming as a couple, single females going or single males going. And like at our local club, there are like trans and like non-binary guests coming. So I'm not really sure how they price that. They definitely were still welcome and there and participating and like regulars in the community. So yeah, it felt a little dated that it was like male, female pricing. But so the single female pricing is usually a good bit lower. The single male pricing is usually higher. Like sometimes it's even like double. And then the couple price is usually like somewhere in the middle. Like it's definitely a better deal than like a single male and a single female coming. But so I still feel a little bit weird about that. And to my understanding is that not every swing club does that. Like sometimes they just instead have like a cap on how many like single males can come. And at our club, I think there's the different pricing, but there's also a cap of how many single males can come in a night. So they do both. But the reason that kind of happens is there is definitely like more males there than females. So the higher price does kind of like and the cap does like limit the extremes that can go, but there's definitely like more of a male audience there than female. So I did kind of appreciate as like a female there that we weren't too overrun. But that's like just a thing to expect. And so there were also some male, like single males that would bring a female friend, like even if she wasn't like participating, just to, I think, get in, which was really interesting. So like, yeah, people coming with like their friends with benefits that they weren't really there to play with and stuff. It's just really interesting. I don't notice that happening a ton, but it does happen a little bit because of the like pricing thing. So it's not uncommon to like see someone kind of there as a couple, but they're really not a couple. They're just kind of each other's buddy for the night. Oh, and I did read, I haven't read about, like I haven't, so I've looked at a lot of swing clubs because I do recommend these to people. In my private mentorship, we've actually like looked at their local clubs, read the rules together to see if it was a vibe for them and stuff. So I've read a lot of swing clubs rules, and I haven't seen this, but I did see on Reddit someone shared that they know of a club that uses a buddy system instead. So instead of there being like different pricing depending on your gender, instead it was like you just couldn't come alone. You had to come with a buddy. And then if your partner, like if your buddy, even if they're not like your sexual buddy, they're just like there to go with you. But if you bring someone and that person like breaks a rule, then you both get kicked out. So it kind of incentivizes people to like keep the people that they're with in check and to like have some accountability with like the buddy you have there and stuff. So I'm not sure how much that affects the balance of like males to females going there, but I thought that was a really interesting. I haven't actually seen a club that does that, but I think that's really interesting too. But just expect that that's a thing. Whereas in the BDSM community, I have not seen different pricing based on gender. And I have also not seen like limits to like who can come in based on their gender either. It's definitely, I don't know, it's just a different thing. And another little thing I wanted to say is that like swinging is a little bit more, it can be a little bit more accessible. Like your city might not have a BDSM dungeon for miles and miles, but you might have a couple swing clubs because it's like there's more people that are in the vanilla community who are into it. It's just more of like a slightly more acceptable thing in a lot of spaces. So it might be more accessible to you. And also like swing spaces can have BDSM events. So our local swing club does BDSM nights, which they say are like their most popular nights of the week. So they definitely are very involved with the kink community. But it's still like they're not going to have the amount of equipment that like a BDSM dungeon would have. But it is really nice that like maybe there's a swing club near you that has kink nights where you can meet people. If the alternative is like either having to drive a long distance for a dungeon that's not local to you or just not to have a dungeon at all. So that's nice. And it can also just feel more like a little easier to go to too, because there's not like the same extreme stuff happening. There might not be the same level of like, you know, restrictions on behavior, so it might feel a little bit more comfortable and social, a little bit less buttoned up, like more of a casual party and way to meet people too. So I think I covered like my positive experience. So like, yeah, it felt like we could leave and not have sex with anybody and that would be fine. Like people were very explicit and like asking for consent. We didn't feel any weird pressure, and going as a couple like felt fine too. Like we didn't feel, I don't know, it was definitely a good situation. We really liked it, and then we're eager to go back. And I also liked that, like, because it was set up for sex to happen, like, we could have sex. Whereas, like, a lot of BDSM spaces, sex is not allowed. And, like, oh my gosh, I get really horny watching BDSM scenes and being with my dom. Like, I want to be able to have sex with him, like, penetrative sex with him around other people and stuff. And so the swing spaces allowed for that to happen, even though we couldn't participate in BDSM in the same way. And there's also a slightly different culture of, like, gear. Like, when you go to a BDSM space, people are usually like wearing their collars, and there's some leashes and some dominatrixy gear and all that kind of like stuff that is so much fun to be around. And swing clubs, like you see a little bit of that, but it's not at the same level unless you're at like a kink specific event, just because it's not all kinksters there. Like just because someone's a swinger doesn't mean they're a kinkster too. And there's some people in the swing community, like I'm sure that there are some swing spaces where BDSM is not understood at all, even by the owners, and there's not a place for it. But that has not been my experience. And yeah, you're just going to have to look at your local club and check it out. But it might be a nice, accessible way for you to be around some kinky people and have some fun public stuff. Some other things I wanted to cover are like some red flags to look out for, and yeah, how to actually find these types of spaces. So some red flags. If a place requires STI testing, for me personally, that is like a big red flag. No. And hear me out if you're confused by that. Here are my thoughts. You can't get a full panel for STIs very easily, and sometimes ever. So it's kind of like, what's the point? And because, some stuff lies dormant, sometimes you can only be tested for something if you've been exposed or have like, you're actively have symptoms and stuff. So some stuff lies dormant. Sometimes you can't be tested for it. Or sometimes the testing looks different. Like sometimes getting tested, like a biological female getting tested for an STI can be easier than for a male, or sometimes it's not possible for a male. And stuff like that. So there's like that whole element of like, first of all, you can't even get the full information for everybody. Like most people are probably just coming with like very basic stuff. So like you might come with the impression that like because you brought in a more thorough panel that like everyone else did too, and everyone is like fully STI free, but that's like probably not the truth. And also like, you can have an STI test and then have sex the next night. So I think that's a little silly to like require that on a broad scale. And that's also just like pretty invasive to like give your name and your medical information to a club, like even if it's a private club, like, I don't know, it still feels weird to me. But so there's that element going on. It's also just kind of this weird, like, it's just this outdated stigmatic language that everyone there is quote unquote clean. It's a bit classist for, to expect everyone to have these panels, which can be expensive if you don't have insurance and stuff. And also like people have STIs, and that is like a normal part of life. And so like restricting someone who has STIs from coming to a party, I don't think is an inclusive, like loving way to treat members of the community. I definitely think it should be more of like a personal, like if I'm having sex with this person, if we're going to exchange our tests, then we're going to do that with each other rather than like doing that with everybody. And it also kind of can set this. So like there's all those elements that I think are really weird, but if a place requires STI testing, it's kind of setting the expectation that like if you're going there, you're going to have sex. So even if that isn't like enforced, even if they're not going to like make you have sex with somebody, it does set this expectation that like you're free to, not only are you like going to have sex, but you're like, most people who are going to a party with STI testing are wanting to have unprotected sex. So there are probably going to be a lot of attendees there who are having unprotected sex or like, not wanting to pop on a condom or use a dam or whatever. So it's just a thing to be aware of. And it's, again, kind of the experience that you want. So if you want to walk into a room where you've had a test and it's been monitored that everyone has a test and everyone's like fair game, then that could be a great space for you. For me, it's a, hey, I'm not interested in this. I think this is really weird and should be more of a personal thing with a little bit more nuance. And if a space has rules around like types of protection, I think that's like, that's a not interested in that type of thing for me too. Because there are some spaces that like require that I've only seen this very rarely, but it does exist. I have seen parties that have like, everyone has to be bareback rules, which is like, ew, such a cringe. Like, I definitely don't want to be at that party. But then there are also spaces that require that like everyone be using like condoms and dams and stuff. And it's like, well, I want to be able to be unprotected with my partner because that's the relationship that we have. And then we have an agreement to like use protection with other people. And that's like our thing that we do. So we would like to just be able to do the thing that we do that works for us and that we've like all consented and talked about and stuff. So that's a thing. And then really just like anything that doesn't jive with you, like anything that you read that and you're like, that's a little weird. I'm not into that. That's a red flag because like there's a right space for everybody. And part of this process is like not me telling you that like every swing club is going to be the right space for you and every Kinkster should go to swing clubs. I do not think that is the case at all. I think even there are some Kinksters that like shouldn't go to BDSM clubs and might not be the right fit for them. But like that's part of what this is you figuring out what it is that you want to have happen and then creating that and finding that. So if something is not a fit for your preferences, that doesn't have to be the place you go and hang out. It might not be a good fit for you because it's that those places are going to be attracting people that want those rules, that want those types of things. So if that's not something that you want, well, just be aware that even if you're willing to agree to those rules for a night, you're probably going to be around people that like live a lifestyle that has those rules that you don't like. So it just might not be putting you in a room with people that you want to be with because the space is going to attract who they're going to attract based on their rules. So if something isn't a fit for you, just be aware that it's probably going to be attracting people that aren't a fit for you either. Okay, and then how to actually find these spaces. Swing clubs tend to be called lifestyle clubs. So that's my biggest tip is to Google lifestyle clubs in like plus your city or whatever. FetLife is a great space to find kinky businesses. There's also you can find professionals through this one kink network, but if it's a public space, it usually does have a Google profile, but sometimes it has kind of a discrete name. So that's why swing clubs usually call themselves lifestyle clubs, is because people who know what that means and are going to go, and people who don't know what that means aren't going to think anything of it and like aren't going to go. And then BDSM spaces tend to be called dungeons. Sometimes they don't have Google listings. Sometimes you do have to go on FetLife to find them or find a person who knows a place and like get in that way. Sometimes it's more of a private club situation. I feel like there was one other way I wanted to share. Oh, you can also search like dominatrixes near you because usually dominatrix studios, even if their primary purpose isn't to have like parties really regularly, they might still have events that you can attend. Like they might have open dungeon hours or like a party once a month or something that you can attend. So it's still worth looking for. Or maybe their partying isn't as regular, but maybe they have an annual party that like fits your boxes and is kind of a thing you want to do. You can also look for conventions. Like there tend to be conventions for specific types of fetishes that might involve some travel. They might not be coming straight to your city, but that can be another way to find, community and places and things you want to hang out with. And for swing clubs, there are also swingers cruises. So you can look up a lifestyle cruises, swing cruises, and then make it part of like your vacationing too, which is, I think, a really cool, lovely experience. I wonder if there are kink cruises. That would be fucking fun. But yeah, again, usually even though swing spaces aren't just for kink, like there are a lot of people who don't get kink. There are also a lot of fucking kinky people in the swing community. So there tend to be like kink nights and events and things that you can go to even within those communities, like across the board is what I've noticed. Yeah, so I hope this was useful for you. I have been wanting to talk about this for a while, but I didn't even realize there was stigma around it until I was like, on Reddit reading about people like trashing swing clubs, which I think is so silly because like, it's just, you got to find what's right for you. And like, but once you know the facts, then you can decide whether or not something's right for you. So I hope this was useful for you. And I will see you in the next lovely episode. Bye, friends.
Thank you so much for joining me this episode. You can follow the podcast on the platform where you're listening to get updates with new episodes. You can follow me on social media at Kinky Bestie. I'm on Instagram. You can also check the show notes for any links or resources that I talked about in this episode, or just more ways to connect with me. And please share this with your kinky friends who could benefit from this type of content. There is also an option for each podcast episode to engage with Q&As or polls. So I'd love to hear from you and create future episodes around what you want to chime in with. So please check those out in the show notes too. And I look forward to hearing from you. Bye.